Hey everyone, DisturbedShadow here to continue on with my Trivium discography. Today we'll be talking about their fifth album, which was their 2011 effort, which is entitled In Waves. Now, as I mentioned last time, Shogun was my personal favorite Trivium album, so I had a lot of hype and excitement coming off of that album because that's right when I first got into them. And then a couple years later, they're coming out with a new album, the first album since I started listening to this band like all the time, and I was very excited for it, and it was kind of disappointing to me in some respects. Now, I know a lot of people really like this album, a lot of people really didn't like this album. It's sort of a mixed bag. I personally do like this album, but I don't think it's as strong as some of their other efforts, and I would go as far as to say it's their worst album since their debut album, Ember to Inferno, which, when I started with discography, I said was their weakest album. And there's quite a gap between that one and this one. This album's still pretty solid, but there are a few issues throughout that make me put it below all the other albums they've done to this date. So let's just jump in and talk about a few things on this album. First, we'll start off with my favorite tracks on the album. We'll just go through all of them. I do want to note that I'm talking about the special edition of this album because that is the version that I personally own, and I think it is the actual, like, what this album's supposed to be, because unlike with a lot of special editions where they just tack on a few bonus tracks at the end, this actually had 3 tracks dispersed throughout the album itself that changed the actual track listings. Like, there's a couple tracks inserted in the middle that aren't on the standard version, but I think they're really good tracks, and I think they add a lot to the flow of this album. And then, of course, there are a couple of bonus tracks tacked on to the end as well, but I really just want to talk about the 3 they added throughout the middle. But let's just jump in and talk about the tracks on this album that I really enjoyed. So we'll start off with the intro track, track number 1, Capsizing the Sea, which is an instrumental piece that sort of builds up into the second track, which is the title track. And it starts off with just piano playing the riff from the bridge of In Waves. And then it just sort of builds up. The drums come in, then some guitar comes in, then another layer of guitar comes in, then the bass, and yet another layer of guitar comes in. As it slowly builds up until it ends, and then it jumps right into In Waves, which is a really heavy opener track to the album, and it's one of my personal favorite tracks on the album. What I do want to say about it is that it's kind of repetitive, and that the verse is just him saying, or it's just Matt shouting "In Waves" like a bunch of times, and then it jumps into the chorus. So it's kind of lacking in that regard, and then it just reverts to that each time it repeats verse and chorus. But it's still a really solid song. And then in the middle, in the bridge, they play the riff that is the intro in Capsizing the Sea, with some cool guitar and piano bits in there. So they mix a little bit of piano in there, which is something Trivium really hasn't done on some of the other albums, besides some intro tracks like the end of Everything off of Ascendancy, but they really didn't do a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's interesting that they work some piano into there. And there's some really cool solos from both Matt and Corey. They each play a solo in the middle here, and they're both really good solos. Some of the best solo work on the album. So that's all I really have to say about this song. It's just kind of repetitive, but it's still got some really great musical moments throughout the whole song to keep it good. Track number 4, just Dusk Dismantled, which is a really heavy, in-your-face kind of song. It's definitely one of the heavier songs on the album. There's no clean singing at all present in the entire album, which gives it a really heavy feel. This is some really heavy, crunchy riffs, but there are some really kind of dumb lyrics in this album. It feels like I've said it before on some of the Trivium's older stuff, that it feels like they're just sort of throwing a bunch of big, long-sounding words to make it sound more intellectual or something, but it's kind of weird, some of the vocal wording and stuff like that, but it's still really solid. And the one thing I want to mention is that there's this cool heavy part in the middle where they bring in some just really chunky, heavy riffs, and then there's acoustic guitar over that, and this kind of interesting sound to it. Track number 5, Watch the World Burn, which is a song that I sort of feel suffers a bit from repetitive lyrics and just repeating the same lyric over and over. But there's some really great musical moments in the song from everyone. There's great... The vocal melodies themselves are really great. It's just some of the lyrics are not so great. And then there's just great guitar work and great bass work and really fantastic drumming. There's some of the best drumming on the album is on the song. It's just lots of cool different stuff going on throughout the whole thing to keep things interesting. So that's all I really have to say about that song, other than like I said, it's got some kind of not so great lyrical moments, but musically it's a really solid track. Track number 6, Black, which is another personal favorite of mine. It's just got this really heavy, groovy riff in it that just really catches my attention, and some great alternations between scream vocals and sung vocals. So there's a bit of different parts of the song. So it's kind of interesting. Track number 7, A Skyline Severance. What I really like the song, some really great heavy riffs throughout the whole thing, but some of the vocal parts are kind of if you're asking me, but overall it's still a pretty solid track. And I really like the guitar work on this song. Track number 8 is the first bonus track I want to talk about, which is a bonus track. It's a short, minute-and-a-half instrumental entitled Ensnare the Sun. It's just got a really funky sound to it. It's all acoustic guitars and percussion, and it's just some, like, vocals. It sounds sort of just sounds like ah or whatever. It's kind of interesting that they did that, and it's just got a really unique sound to it. It sort of feels like a song you'd hear in like a desert level of a video game or something. It actually kind of reminds me of the Gerudo Valley theme from Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time a little bit. It's got a kind of makes me think of that when I hear it, even though it's kind of different, but it's got a similar vibe to it, and has a similar feel, and it makes you feel like a desert or something, like I said. Now, track number 9, which is track number 8 on the standard edition, but for me, it's track number 9, which is Built to Fall, which is one of the main singles off this album. A lot of people didn't like this song because it sort of sounded too mainstreamy, but I just really love the sound of this song. It's just got a great sound to it. Great lyrics in the verses, and just Matt's vocals really show off their range. There's some soft melodic singing, there's more gritty type of singing, there's screaming, there's all kinds of vocals throughout this track, and it just all comes together really nicely. Plus there's some great guitar work, and I really like the solo on this track. One thing I do want to mention is in the bridge, there's just some stupid lyrics. It's you've got your war against my head, push that button, make it end, repeated over and over again. It's just kind of stupid sounding if you're asking me, but other than that, I really like this song, and it's a great song. Track number 10, Caustic Are the Ties That Bind, which is a really long title, but it's a very good song. I really like this song because they do a few different things. They do have some of that weird repetitive vocals in the verses, but there's just some great moments throughout the whole song. Plus there's a really great moment in the middle of the song where it drops out to more like clean guitars, and it gets softer and slower, and a great moment. Like the second time I saw them live, they played this track, and it's just a really great moment where the crowd got into it, and they all threw up their lighters or smartphones, depending on what they had on them at the time. But it was just a great moment live, and it's just a really great song overall, just where it gets soft in the middle, and then it builds up to this great moment where they alternate between great harmonized moments between Matt and Corey, and they each do a solo as well. It's just got a great sound to it. Before coming back to the faster paced chorus again, it's just got a great progression to it, and I just really like the song, like I said. Track number 12, well, it is on the bonus version. This is the next bonus track I want to talk about, which is Drowning in Slow Motion, which is another personal favorite of mine from this album. This just got a really great sound to it. I think it's better than some of the songs that were included on the standard edition of this album, and I really think it should have been included. But, of course, if you get this special edition, you do get this in a great spot on the album. It's just got some great heavy guitar riffs and some great melodic guitar melodies, and they just sort of alternate between those two. And there's some great vocal work and great lyrics on this song, so I really think it should have been included on the standard edition. And then track number 13 is another bonus track, A Grey So Dark, which is another favorite of mine. It's a more melodic song, but I really love the lyrical themes of this album, of this song, and great lyrics themselves. Even though there are some repetitive moments, it's still a really solid song. Because everything about this song has a great feel to it. So I really have a strong connection with the song. I really enjoy it. Track number 14, Chaos Reigns. I think it is the weakest track on this album, which is why I want to talk about it. It's just really repetitive. The guitars are boring. There's not a lot of interesting stuff happening on it. And legitimately, the chorus is just Chaos Reigns repeated like 4 or 5 times. It's just not that great of a song. Track number 15 of All These Yesterdays, which is the sort of the closer of the album. I just really like the sound of the song. It's got slow build up, and it's got more melodic singing throughout the whole thing. what I do want to say is that the solo on this track feels a little bit out of place, but other than that, it's a really great song. And then it progresses into the actual closer song, which is track number 16, Leaving This World Behind, which, like Capsizing the Sea, is sort of a... Well, as that was an intro, this is very much an outro track. What is interesting about this part is it plays the riff and the acoustic guitar layered on top of that, exactly the same as in the bridge of Dusk Dismantled, which is an interesting callback to a previous track on the album. And then layered over that is some spoken word parts from Matt to sort of end the album. I sort of feel like it should have just been a part of the end of all these yesterdays. Like, I wouldn't listen to this track by itself, but coming right off of all of these yesterdays, I would listen to it. So that's all I have to say there. And then finally, since we're talking about the special edition, I'll also mention the last 2 tracks on the album, which are more bonus tracky in nature, which of course is track number 17, Shattering the Skies Above, which was the song they recorded for the God of War Blood and Metal EP for God of War 3, which they previously released like a year before the album came out. This is a really great song. I don't want to go too much into it since I don't really consider it part of the actual album, but it's just got a great sound to it. And this is the first time I actually heard Nick Augusto on the drums after Travis had left. And the drumming on this track is phenomenal. I just want to mention that. And finally, track number 18, Slave New World, which is a cover of Sepultura, which is a pretty good cover, but there's nothing too special about it. But I don't really think it's that great of a Sepultura track to begin with. Say that what you will, but I just don't really enjoy that song that much, either version of it, but it's still a pretty decent cover for what it is. So that wraps up my thoughts on the tracks on the album, so let's just talk about the band members themselves. First, let's talk about the drums, because, of course, back in 2009, a year after they released Shogun, Travis left the band, and they almost actually split up because of this, but then their drum tech, Nick Augusto, stepped in and performed with them, and according to them, they brought a lot of new energy to the band, and I kind of have to agree with that. That while this album is lacking in a lot of areas, it is not lacking in the drumming department. It's just so many great drum lines throughout the whole thing, cool feels, interesting stuff, great double bassing. It does all this stuff, it mixes it together so nicely. And there's just so many moments, like on In Waves or Inception of the End, or a bunch of other songs. Like Inception of the End, I want to talk about how it's sort of a lackluster song, but there's great drumming throughout the whole thing. Or Watch the World Burn, well, it's a great song as well, but the drumming is what really makes it one of the better songs of the album, because there's lots of great drumming parts through the whole song to keep things interesting. Caustic Are the Ties That Bind, where he does some great moments where it's more hectic moments in the choruses. When it goes to that more slow pullback part, he does more simplistic drumming, so he's always fitting the situation perfectly. I mean, this guy is just a machine. When he's doing double bass on songs like Dusk Dismantled, it's just insane how fast he's going. And he gets it perfectly live, too, so that's a really great thing. He did a great job here. And great drumming really brings this album up a level. And I think it's sort of what, while I do consider one of their weaker albums, really puts the distance between it and their weakest album, Ember to Inferno. It's just that extra level of drumming. So that's Nick on the drums. Now we'll talk about Matt and Corey on the guitars. This album, guitar-wise, is a lot more simplistic than the really heavily technical and melodic Shogun. So they sort of pulled things back and focus on more simplistic riffs and solos, which is sort of an interesting move, but it doesn't really have the same connection to me as the guitar work did on Shogun, just because there's so many amazing riffs and melodies on that album, and they went a completely different direction. And I give them props for that, but it's not really the sort of style I enjoy for them. And they did go back to a lot of those repetitive moments where they repeat lyrics over and over, which is something they did a lot on Ascendancy, but it just doesn't feel the same, and it's just not as good as that album, which I consider one of their better albums, despite the repetitive lyrics. But this album does it a lot more than that, and it sort of suffers a bit for that. But otherwise, the vocals themselves, so I'm sort of transitioning from guitars to vocals. The vocals themselves are really solid. Matt has a great range where he's doing the more melodic type of singing or the more heavy screaming type of stuff. So he's covering his bases really nicely on this album. But he suffers a bit in the lyrical department where the lyrics are a bit repetitive or they just sound kind of stupid. But overall, he's doing a really great job on the vocals despite his weak lyrical writing on this album. Except for a few moments like on Built to Fall where the lyrics really stand out to me. And then finally, Paolo on the bass. There's a lot of cool, interesting bass moments, but it's a lot more pulled back and simplified than it was on Shogun, where he's doing crazy things like playing 2 bass solos and doing all these crazy technical bass riffs. So he's sort of more in the background on this album, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not exactly as interesting as the stuff he was doing on Shogun. But on the other hand, he's turned up really nice and loud in the mix, so I can even hear him when I do not have headphones in, which is something I always like to hear. And if you watched my reviews before, you know that's this kind of stuff I like to hear on the bass. So that sort of wraps up my thoughts on the band. Let's just give me one final wrap-up of this album. I think it's definitely worth checking out, but like I said, it is not their best album. And if you're new to Trivium, this is not the one to start with. I'd recommend Shogun or The Crusade or Vengeance Falls, which is the next one I'm going to talk about in a few days. So, like I said, check this album out if you want, but it's not their best work, in my opinion. But I'm just some random dude on the internet, so listen to it and form your own opinions. But if you don't like it, or if you do like it, that's great. Anyway, that wraps up my review of this album, and I will see you guys very soon for my review of Vengeance Falls. So until then, I'm DisturbedShadow, and be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you want to see more of my reviews. And I'll see you guys next time.